This is the first conclave where there are betting markets, the poly market, the same way that we bet on presidential races and political outcomes. And what they're doing is they're dropping negative hits on cardinals who are rising in the betting markets to change the odds to manipulate the fan duels of the picking the next pope is what's going on. And there has already been like $27 billion bet on who the next pope is going to be, which is the same as was bet on the Super Bowl. So that's how big this is globally. And incidentally, last piece, I promise, betting on a papal conclave is one of the very few things in Catholicism that can get you immediately excommunicated.
Woo!
It'll kick you out immediately. So beware, Catholics. If you're going to be betting on FanDuel and you've got an app to vote on who the Pope is going to be, you might want to think twice about it.
I knew in this episode that I could scratch the itch when Mike Madrid got on here about talking about Catholicism and a conclave and all. This is right up his overeducated ass around all of this shit. I have no idea what 15 of the words he said were, but I'm fascinated by this because, as I've talked about, I remind all of you, Mike, where did I go in Mexico to see the thing on the cactus leaf?
You went to the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
That's the closest I've been to the Pope, right there. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast, coming to you live, not from the Vatican, but from Washington, D.C. and Casa Rocha Central. Mike Madrid, are you at the Vatican?
Have been offered an exclusive invite to vote in the papal conclave.
It's rigged. This is a rigged thing already. Go ahead.
So I'll be there just to advise a little bit. I'm going to give a little bit of political advice. They wanted the best political advice in the world, and so I got the call, and I flew out to make it possible to advise on global geopolitics. And so I apologize. I had a little bit of a snafu getting on today, but I've got some.
Thought it's because you was praying for a pope. I know how you Catholics are. Y'all was praying for a pope. You had your rosary beads out. If I use that in the right way.
Yeah. No, that's right. To take care of the sinners like you, we got a lot of souls to save.
You're going to have to pray and get off this thing and get back to praying if you're going to save me. But I look at it like a multi-candidate primary. There's a lot of strategy I could think of. And I said this morning on CNN on whether they liked it or not. But that's what I kind of adhere to. For all of you who are listening, we're not recording this on Wednesday morning. We're doing this on Thursday. We've already had some black smoke this morning. That means that they've already started voting. Yesterday, no pope. This morning, no pope.
Peter's eyes are falling.
Here we are.
There we are.
Pope Leo XIV is now appearing, coming to the central loggia of the Basilica.
Very special moment.
And there he is.
There he is, Cardinal.
And the applause going up.
Well, Habemus Papam, we have a pope. While Chuck and I were recording, we got news that there was white smoke emanating from the Sistine Chapel, and the papal conclave of 133 cardinals came to a decision. 2/3 of the cardinals voted in a very, very fast conclave, only 3 rounds of voting. Only one other papal election in the last 125 years, 130 years, was decided this quickly. And Cardinal Robert Prevost of Chicago, an American pope, has ascended to the throne of St. Peter. Of course, not everybody's Catholic. The stereotype of all Latinos being Catholic is obviously an overplayed one. Those of you who followed me, listened to me talk about the politics of Catholicism and the Catholic question with Latino voters know that this is a very big part of what is changing amongst Latino voters. But I think it's also very fair to say, and I explore this theme quite extensively in my book, there is certainly something about the Catholic imagination as a cultural component to Latino culture. They're inextricably intertwined, regardless of your faith heritage or lack thereof. So the selection of a pope is important, all the more important because, again, an American pope and a pope, in many ways, of 2 Americas. Cardinal Robert Prevost, before he became Pope Leo XIV, was a missionary to the country of Peru for about 20 years and actually is a Peruvian citizen. This is where he met Jorge Bergoglio, another cardinal, Argentinian, who would also become Pope, Pope Francis. They struck up a friendship primarily based off of the commonality of Franciscan belief systems, which Pope Francis became from the Franciscan or Jesuit order, leaning into Pope Francis of Assisi, St. Francis of Assisi, and St. Augustine, Augustinian order, which is Pope Leo comes from. Both of these have a very deep reverent commitment to the poor and the least among us. And I thought I'd take a couple of minutes to talk about what a new pope means. All of these things, American identity, Latin American identity, and a commitment to the poor and the least among us, all of those thematics flow straight through the Latino voter. And so I just wanted to kind of point out what I think a lot of this means. Make no mistake about this. This was absolutely a rebuke to what is happening in the United States of America. For those of you who may be Catholic or close Catholic observers, the idea of an American pope was something I certainly never thought not only I would see, but my kids, probably my grandchildren, would ever see. Because of not only the disproportionate political power of America in our times, but also because of the very nature of religious identity in the United States, very distinctly different from European, South American, Southeast Asian Catholicity. So this is a very big moment. The question becomes why? And again, I don't think you can get around the fact that the rise of the politics in the United States of America has led to a real questioning amongst the faithful as to what would the church do, what is appropriate church teachings on what is happening in this country at this time. And the College of Cardinals, I think in their providential wisdom, have made it very, very clear, this shall not stand. The Conclave globally acted to say, we reject this sort of a bastardization of Christianity. This is not Christian. It is certainly not Catholic. And the church is leaning into this global conflict, as it were, this spiritual conflict, and saying, we will rely on what we have known from the teachings of Christ. With the apostolic succession, every priest can track their lineage back to St. Peter, the first pope, all with a very clear understanding of what love is. That love grew into contention with J.D. Vance and his pushing back and telling the Pope that the Pope didn't understand Catholic teachings on love, as well as what we're saying with immigrants and the refugees and the basic way that we treat human beings. So the elevation of this Pope is important for a lot of reasons. The Americanness of his identity, I think, is incredibly and increasingly important as there becomes a spiritual fight, like so many other fights in this country, between what actually being Christian, and I would suggest even being human, means in a time of rising cruelty, a time of rising extremism, a time of rising nativism. The church is saying we're going to push back. This is also a very young pope. At 69 years old, he could easily be around for 15 to 20 years. Again, as the vicar of Christ, as the leader of the largest Christian denomination in the world, a denomination that transcends political boundaries and is very present not only in Western Europe and South America and in Southeast Asia and in China, but increasingly in Africa, where it is growing faster than any other religion in the world. So a lot of things to consider. I would not expect that you're going to see much changes in terms of female priesthood, for example, gay marriage, marriage equality, certainly not on the reproductive rights or pro-life question. That's standard basic Catholic ideology. These aren't debatable questions. These are long determined, long held 2,000-year-old views. I don't believe that those are going to change. They're sacramental by nature, which is most Catholics who are watching will understand the profundity, the profoundness of what that means. The church has never changed its position on the seven sacraments that we have. So that's not going to change, but I think you're going to see a very significant, decisive change in tone, change in approach, change in contrast to what we are seeing emerge in the world. And I say this, and I'll say this in closing too, the moment that I'm seeing right now is very similar to the political situation that we saw in 1939 with the rise of an election of Pope Pius XII, a pope who was elected, again, a very fast conclave, just as fast as Leo. Those two popes were the last two popes to be elected in the third round very quickly by their colleagues by a 2/3 vote. The reason why Pope Pius the 12th was chosen was because of the rising shadow of Nazism in Europe. And he held a particularly important position as not just the Secretary of State for the Vatican, but also as what's called the Papal Nuncio to Germany. He was the Vatican ambassador, essentially, to Germany, had a strong working relationship with the Germans, and was chosen, most historians would suggest, largely for his deep diplomatic knowledge and political savvy as it related to the church's need to navigate through the rise of the Third Reich. He obviously had a very big hand in the course of human global events beyond the church. I think you're going to see something very similar from Pope Leo. His name Leo was taken from Pope Leo XIII, who was Pope between the 1890s and 1903, I think was his passing. Pope Leo is known for his beginning of Catholic social teaching, which was at the height of the Industrial Revolution, workers' rights. Again, the Catholic imperative to serve out, seek, and aid the least among us. During industrialization, worker exploitation became central to the church's mission. And so Catholic theology, Catholic teaching became very recentered during the industrial age towards the exploit of the worker. And I would suggest that this new Pope, Pope of the digital age, whose writings on Twitter are already becoming out into the public space, his savvy, his knowledge, his awareness, his younger perspective is going to be formative as we look towards not just the spiritual vitality of the church, the spiritual vitality of Latinos worldwide, but also the geopolitical implications of what's happening in this country. And we will be watching, observing, and talking very, very closely about what that's going to mean for the Latino vote going forward, because I think it's going to have some very significant implications. And with that, let's get back to the show.
And so by the time you hear this, there could be a pope. Now, for all of you listening to the Latino Vote podcast, Mike Madrid, our resident Catholic expert. Chuck Rocha is not our religious go-to guy, but Mike Madrid would say that this is important to lots of little old grannies and little abuelas out there, that this is a big deal in our culture. Mike, explain why this is.
Well, there's a whole lot of reasons. A lot of it is, and I think that Latino Catholicism, like most Catholicism, is very deeply imbued in regional culture. And I think that Latino culture is very much, if not religious, although it is very spiritually, culturally Catholic. That's a whole book. Many books have been written on it. But the way we perceive the world, what's called the Catholic imagination, is a very big part of understanding Latino culture and Latino identity. Even if you don't believe in God, it's just a part of who we are. But most importantly, this conclave, I do want to we'll speak about this conclave because it is interesting. It is political. It's one of the things I really love about the church is people say, oh, it's not political. No, it's absolutely political. It's not like the movie Conclave, entirely. Politico ran a really terrible article, by the way, the other day suggesting that, Cardinals were watching the movie Conclave to learn how to vote in a conclave. That's nonsense. You know this as a young Catholic. How this works. Not the nuts and bolts of it, but the truth is, if you become a bishop or a cardinal, you don't need to watch a Hollywood movie on how a conclave works. But there's a couple of things I do want to mention that I think people might find interesting. If not, we can just edit it all out. But there's always the shortest round of voting in the last 100 years was the 1939 Papal Conclave. They elected a pope in only 3 rounds. It still took 3 rounds. But it was right as World War II was starting. And they picked probably the most qualified diplomat, who was the Secretary of State for the Vatican. He was what's called the Papal Nuncio to Germany, which is basically an ambassador. And he was also the Camerlengo, which is basically the Chief of Staff.
Say that again twice. What was his name?
Well, the Camerlengo is the title. So
my bad.
He was the Camerlengo, which is like the Chief of Staff to the Pope, handles all the Vatican business and affairs. He was the Papal Nuncio, which is the ambassador to Germany, very important in 1939, and he was the Secretary of State. So there's nobody more qualified. He ended up becoming Pope Pius XII, and a very controversial pope. There's a lot of questions as to how much he was communicating, back-channeling with Hitler or not. But my point is this, and I'm sorry, we'll get off of all this. But my point is, the Catholic Church is the one transcendent organization that is bigger than these political boundaries. It has been since it was founded. And the Pope is a geopolitical player. And at a time when the world is changing and transforming, who the Pope is and who the Pope becomes is very, very important in the way the direction of history works out, regardless of whether you're Catholic or religious or Christian or Protestant or Muslim or Jewish or whatever. None of that matters. This is a very significant global player.
And that's what this next Pope faces. I think it's really fascinating. So to watch the politics of the church in the conclave, at least as much as we're able to see it, I think is extraordinarily fascinating.
Let me pull on that string a little bit more now that I have a Catholic expert. I will let you know, Mike Madrid, that this morning in the CNN green room, I was sitting with a woman. Gosh, I'm gonna get her name up, and Andres will put it in the show notes. She hosts the Catholic XM radio station on XM Radio.
Great. She's great, helpful.
Yeah, and she's like a middle of the road. Like she lives in Louisiana, and I'll find her name in a minute. I'll Google it after I get through asking you this question. But I sat there and just peppered her this morning, bless her heart, at 5:30 in the morning. Like, how many popes has there been? When's the last time they did it with the smoke? When does this thing do this thing? And she just had every freaking answer.
Yeah.
And then when I got on set, Audie Cornish, who is the host of the morning show, who's great. We love Audie. Y'all listen to her podcast. I've been on her podcast. It's great. But she brought up something, Mike, that I saw yesterday that I want to bring in. I'm not a Catholic expert. I don't know much thing about church. I'm a born-again Christian with the Baptist denomination. We didn't allow dancing. But anyway, I digress. I'll say that there's been this new phenomenon that I want to ask you about with these young men running and getting more into Catholicism, joining the church.
Yeah.
There was this thing on TV about it, and Audie interviewed somebody on her podcast, and she had her on the TV this morning. What is your take on this new energy or this new movement, mainly amongst young men, to the Catholic religion?
So there's a couple of big things that are changing. Incidentally, as I was listening to you, there's been 247 popes. The smoke began in the 500s with the white smoke and black smoke. The reason why is because the conclave, the College of Cardinals, is cloistered, meaning that they're isolated. They're in conclave. Conclave in Latin is conclave, which a lot of our Spanish listeners will know.
Lock door?
Lock with a key, but it actually began, what it actually means is in Latin is with a nail, because they used to lock the door, they used to nail it shut. Like, you ain't coming out till you bring us a pope.
Ooh.
So that was back in the old days, and that was when that little smoke pipe, that little pope vent, would have white or black smoke. And so that's how the conclave begins and works. Now, a couple big dynamics that the church is facing, and this will be relevant to what we're talking about. The Catholic Church is beginning to grow again after about 40 or 50 years of pretty steep decline. It's growing in a couple places. Massive growth in what we call the global south. Africa, Asia, the Philippines, and Latin America, parts of Latin America. In the West, it's collapsing. So the Pope has never had anything but the Pope has never been anything other than a Western European, largely, except for the early days of the Church, when people like St. Peter were Middle Easterners, of course. As it moves towards the West, 90% of the Church's history has been a European. Overwhelmingly, Italians have been the Pope. The Pope is also the Bishop of Rome. Sorry, I'm getting way in the weeds here. But so a lot of Romans have been popes. There's this dynamic where young men have become more conservative socially. We're seeing that in our politics here in the United States of America, but there is this return towards more traditional understandings of the world. This is not uncommon throughout human history. For example, the resurgence of the Victorian era. At a time of extraordinary social change, people look for tradition, they look for defined roles, they look for a more rigid, orthodox understanding of the world to help them navigate when things feel like they're all out of control and the world is coming to an end. I'm not saying that's the main driver of what's happening, but I think it's kind of the main driver of what's happening here. So this is also changing our politics, and it's changing the politics of the conclave. And I want to mention one other thing. If you're on social media, you're starting to see all these people, these kind of Catholic Twitter and conservative Twitter and Republican right-wing Twitter, they're now pushing and advocating for candidates. This guy's, Pope Francis was bad. We need a more traditionalist. You're seeing literally attacks on certain cardinals from different out in the world, like opposition research, like negative hits. And I couldn't figure out what was going on because it's not affecting the vote. These guys are isolated. They don't have any devices. Everything is bugged. There's no internal or external communications. But here's what's happening, Chuck, and this is fascinating. This is the first conclave where there are betting markets, the poly market, the same way that we bet on presidential races and political outcomes. And what they're doing is they're dropping negative hits on cardinals who are rising in the betting markets to change the odds to manipulate the fan duels of the picking the next pope is what's going on. And there has already been like $27 billion bet on who the next pope is going to be, which is the same as was bet on the Super Bowl. So that's how big this is globally. And incidentally, last piece, I promise, betting on a papal conclave is one of the very few things in Catholicism that can get you immediately excommunicated.
Ooh.
It'll kick you out immediately. So beware, Catholics. If you're going to be betting on FanDuel and you've got an app to vote on who the Pope is going to be, might want to think twice about it.
I knew in this episode that I could scratch the itch when Mike Madrid got on here about talking about Catholicism and a conclave and all. This is right up his overeducated ass around all of this shit. I have no idea what 15 of the words he said were, but I'm fascinated by this because, as I've talked about, I remind all of you, Mike, where did I go in Mexico to see the thing on the cactus leaf?
You went to the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
That's the closest I've been to the Pope right there. And I don't think I was very close, but I was something of a gigantic Catholic church that probably was around during some of these conclaves. That's the closest I know. But as an ignorant East Texas Mexican redneck, I find religion fascinating because it's one of those things I know nothing about. Yeah. So Ebony will tell you quickly that I'm into, for the last 3 or 4 years, watching these period pieces about England and the Catholic Church, and even going back to the Vikings and the Vikings raiding the Catholics over there. That I'm just enthralled by that because it's history that I never learned. And it's people fighting with and fucking with swords. Then I'm like, man, I'm all in for this raiding and folks and religion and politics and the popes and the church trying to tell people what they can and can't do over land.
Yes.
All of that to me is like three-dimensional chess because I'm like, wow.
That's why I love that. That's why I love it too. It's like Game of Thrones.
That's a good point.
And it's like the Pope, who's a Catholic king, who's not, the politics of managing everybody's business. That's why the King of Kings is the Pope. I mean, obviously that's Jesus Christ ultimately, but that's when you had Catholic kings. They were playing politics with the intersection of religion, because you might have a bunch of people in your country who will listen to the Pope before they listen to the king, and that gets politically messy. And all of this stuff, everything about the Catholic Church for thousands of years has a ritual, has a role, has a story, and there are so many threads you can go down. I know like 2% of it. It's just, there's so much of it. And it's fascinating if nothing else.
Two things were brought up this morning that intersect with this in politics. And obviously, a lot of this has to do with Latinos because we have a lot of Catholics. Not all of us are. I'm an example of how we're not. Mike Madrid has talked about how born-agains and folks down in South Texas and the Christian down there have taken over Catholics and the movement to the right of Latinos. We've talked about that on the podcast. But this morning, they talked about two demographics on this special I was on this morning on CNN. And part of it was about these young men that are moving into the Catholic denomination because of the traditionalism of a man's place in the family, the man being the leader. They tie it to this bromosphere of what's going on social media that Mike kind of alluded to a little bit there. But interestingly enough, they talked about how young women between 25 and 35 are becoming less religious. And we're 3 out of 10 women in that demographic now are identified as either bisexual or LGBTQ. And so you have this new traditionist with the men. You kind of have, I would think of it as the liberal awakening of women who can think whatever they want to think, but they think that they're gay or that they don't want to be around religion. And it's so interesting about how those two groups and the way that they've moved politically in the last few cycles. I don't know the word that I'm trying to say there, Mike, but it relates with where they're at now politically on R&D, right?
Of course, 100%. And look, this is fascinating to me. It's a big part of my book because we're trying to explain the gender gap. Why are younger people, which disproportionately is Latino now in this country, why are they moving in very different directions? Why are men seeking this more conservative traditional role, going to church more often than not? And it's mass. They're becoming more Catholic than evangelical. And then why are women moving in the exact opposite direction when normally it is the females who tend to be more conservative and kind of build that family structure for men to be, to build a home with children. The exact opposite is happening. And the answer, I would suggest, is this. Latinos also have the largest education divide. Our women are going to college at rates far faster than our men are.
And be elected more, you said.
and being elected more, and they're rising in positions of power in corporate America, in nonprofits, in politics. And so as a result, you are seeing women who don't need men financially, who are very independent, who are thinking very differently as higher educated individuals. And men, I think, are a little bit lost and flailing and trying to find their way through the world in a way that is unique for us as a species, at least in recorded history. And it's manifesting most clearly with Latinos at this point in time, simply because we're younger as we're entering this new digital age and time. And so when you're talking about Latinos and the gender gap, you can't not talk about the education gap, because that's really driving so much of this.
I just got one question before we move off the Catholic and the Pope thing. Would you get excommunicated if the thumbnail for the podcast had you in a Pope hat? Because me and Andreas are going to put you in a Pope hat, but I don't want to get you whatever the excommunicated thing is.
I don't want to get kicked out. That's probably not a good idea.
Andreas, we're going to think of something else.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be the one where Mike Madrid shows up in hell at the gate and he's going to be, that Chuck Rocha got me excommunicated. Now I'm down here in hell with all these people. Anyway.
I got a good feeler that if I ended up being there, everybody would be one person removed from you. It'd be like, oh, wait, Chuck. Let's make it a little easier.
Everybody would know me, right? I'd be the gatekeeper at the gate. Like, I knew you were going to be down here. It was just a matter of time. Well, this is fascinating. For those of you listening, it's important culturally for many of you who haven't lived through a conclave and through this process, they don't come around that often. And this morning when I was meeting with the young woman who runs the XM Radio, the Catholic channel, she was talking about the difference in ages, is that 76 may be old for a U.S. president, but that is not old for a pope. They have a different role.
Yeah.
And like the Asian man who's up is much younger than the Italian pope who, quote unquote, hypothetically is in the top, echelon of folks who could be picked. He's 76.
Right.
But nobody really knows. Even Pope Francis, who she told me, Mike, had come in second like the time before.
Yes.
Nobody thought he would even be in the running because he got second last time, right?
Yeah, and he was much older. You can't be over 90. There is an age limit.
90. Maybe we should put that in democratic politics. 90, then you got to get out.
The rules of the Papal Conclave apply to the Democratic caucus now.
Yeah,
once you hit 90, you gotta
go, Joe. You gotta go.
You gotta go. I love that. But you also, I think you cannot. The over 70. Most of these are well over 70, deep into their 70s. And then, the lifespan, you're a pope for life. Pope Benedict, who was before Pope Francis, resigned from office. That hadn't happened in 500 years. That rarely happened. And so that created its own, issues. But yes, as people are living longer, you have to be of a certain age and you can't be over 90.
One last thing before we get off of this. Remind me, because Pope Francis was there for a good amount of time, didn't he personally appoint 70% of these people?
Yeah. So this is important too. The size of the College of Cardinals, and it's only cardinals that can vote in a papal conclave. These are who are called the princes of the church. They're the voters. It's as big or little as the Pope wants it to be. So there were 62 cardinals in 1939. There are now 122 cardinals. And so this is where a lot of the speculation is. Pope Francis was viewed very much as sort of a quote unquote progressive pope. I would take a little bit of issue with that because you can't put conservative and progressive titles on a pope. It just doesn't work that way. But Pope Francis has appointed 2/3 of all the College of Cardinals. So if you looked at it and you're looking at a very crass way, is this College of Cardinals progressive or conservative? It's overwhelmingly progressive. The chances of a quote unquote conservative being elected are very, very de minimis. The question is it going to be more of a quote unquote centrist? The reality is the difference between a Pope Francis and a Pope John Paul or a Pope Benedict has been minuscule. What's different is their tone. It's their language through which they speak about these issues. Pope Francis didn't change any major Catholic doctrine. None of them have in thousands of years. But when he was talking to LGBTQ people, for example, he would say things like, who am I to judge? The way Christ would say that.
Pray for me.
Yeah, exactly. Pray for me.
See,
exactly.
I've been paying attention.
Look at you. Very humble, very different approach than a Benedict who is very academic and clinical and orthodox and saying, well, the scripture says this, and this about this, and that. So it's really more about style and tone than anything else.
So let's see what this, one thing about these princes of the church, their style and pomp and circumstance with, I've never seen so much gold and red. And for a guy who loves red as a Democrat, I love to watch all the. I don't think pomp and circumstance may not be appropriate for
the aesthetic.
The aesthetic is what I'm looking for.
Catholic aesthetic is actually stunning. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get. I like the aesthetic. Anyway, I think that we're going to be. I hope by the time you hear this, we have a pope. There's no way it's going to go till next week, which means it'll go to next week. Because if it's in next week and we still don't have one, we'll be in full meltdown coming to you live from the Vatican. Mike Madrid will be out there going, and he'll be like, "Oh, y'all going to hell for voting on this shit, right?"
I actually will. I will be in Rome on May 22nd.
This has got to be over by then, or we're going to make Mike the Pope.
Yeah, so they're going to ask me to come in and be the new Camerlengo for a little while to make sure that everything's running okay, and then once it's all figured out, then we'll go from there.
Speaking of just the opposite of what Catholicism and the Pope would be, I just got back from Los Angeles, the city of angels, not to be confused with the Catholic Church, a different kind of angels. I was out in the Beverly Hills. Let me come and listen to my story about a man named Jed, a poor mountaineer, barely kept his family fed. Then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude
Beverly
oil. That is
Hillbillies.
Beverly Hillbillies.
Look at you. How do you know that committed to heart?
Because I grew up watching the Beverly Hillbillies every single day at 3:30 when I got off the school bus in front of a gigantic bowl of Captain Crunch cereal. Anyway, that's how Mike Madrid was reading the news, and I was watching the Beverly Hillbillies and eating soup with a stirring spoon, just so all of you know how this went down. These are true. So I've come a long way to being invited to Los Angeles to speak at the world famous, evidently, Milken Institute of Global Brouhaha. I'm not even sure.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. I didn't know.
Very big deal. Yeah. You sent me a text on what is this? And I was like, oh, you want to go to that.
Don't tell my business, Mike Madrid, but I literally sent Mike, I'm like, is this something I should go to? I don't know if we're going to be milking cows or what's going on, but something with milking. Something we're milking something, but anybody tell me what we was milking? I know it was milking goats, milking cows. I'm like, but seems like something I want to go to. And then they sent me the panelists. They're like, Chuck, we want you to talk about the future of the Democratic Party. And I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. Like, this is exactly what I want to go out there and have a bitch fest. And then it was like the who's who of the upper echelon of the thinking heads within the party. Jason Furman from Harvard, who worked for Obama. Neera Tanden, who I remind everybody here couldn't get through a Senate confirmation hearing because the Republicans hate her so much. She was at the Center for American Progress. And then Biden was like, well, then screw all y'all. I'll give her one of the highest positions that's not Senate approved in the White House working for the OMB. She went to Yale Law School. And then Mike Madrid, just to keep it going, those two were on the panel with me with the president of Third Way.
Yeah.
And then the president of Third Way's there, who hates Bernie Sanders and hates the left, and that's what he talks about. And then on top of that, there was this Republican woman from the Bulwark, Sarah Longwell. So you had these four people and me, and we had an hour conversation. And then you had a guy, Josh Barrow, who I loved. Josh was really cool. He was the moderator, but I was thinking the whole time, I'm never going to have more than 10 minutes to say much of anything. But you'll be proud to know, Mike Madrid, that Politico and other outlets were out there covering it for the day. Keep in mind, y'all, to draw the picture, this thing is full of CEOs, millionaires, and billionaires. I had no idea. I probably wouldn't have went because it's intimidating as hell. Hence why I'm texting Mike like, who are these people? On the same day that I spoke, Pitbull spoke, Magic Johnson spoke, the head of Google spoke.
Yeah.
And the next morning in the Politico newspaper, guess who got of the whole conference for the day, the quote of the day?
Chuck
Rocha,
what'd you say?
Latino Vote podcast coming in hot. I said, the Democratic Party has a brand problem. We need to burn this shit down and start over and rebuild trust with the American people if we're ever going to succeed. Seems pretty common sense. Who knew it'd be the quote of the day at the Milken Institute?
Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations. This is a very, very big deal. I mean, it's like Aspen Ideas Festival. You're talking to people who are the prime movers on the planet. I mean, these are people who aren't just opinion leaders. They can actually make the decisions that move things in the right direction. So good for you. You deserve to be recognized that way. Also good for you for being candid and direct, which I knew you would be. You're not afraid to speak truth to power. And that's what you were doing by saying that. You're obviously going to have to ruffle some feathers no matter what you say. But I think it's important that your voice was there. I'm glad that you were picked, and I knew that you would do a great job. Let's also post that Politico article too in the comment section too, so people can see it. If you've got, is it online? Do they make it available?
They did a live stream, Mike. So I'm assuming that they have it somewhere because it was one of the only. Every day they pick the top panel of the day during that hour, and they live stream it, and they live stream mine.
Okay, well, let's, Andreas, if
we'll find that
live stream and plug that in there. Let's put it in there. Or maybe we'll just wrap it on a separate. For YouTube, we'll put a separate insert for listeners and watchers on the YouTube channel. You can watch that clip. I haven't seen it yet, but Chuck, but I'm looking forward to it.
We talked a lot about what me and Mike talk about here. I think that's what needed to be said. I have a lot of feelings. The article from Politico also says then the whole thing derived or went down the rabbit hole of just everybody pretty much MFing the establishment Democrats, which we did. I'm like, we're not changing anything, and we're going to have to change getting back to talking to workers. Like, workers have walked away from the party, and if you don't get them back, we're going to continue to lose. Like, it's everything me and Mike's talked about. So I channeled my best Mike Madrid for many of the answers and made myself look smart in front of all these Harvard and Yale folks in my own way.
Did anybody disagree with that?
No, I got applause. They fucking applauded when I said the shit I said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody else got an applause line but me, and I got 2 of them I remember. Now, you know, I always shucks it up. I sat down with my cowboy boots on and my hat, and I first started by saying, look, I am not a Trump embed here. I know there's a lot of, like, 5 different Trump cabinet officials were also speaking the day before and on my day. Like, this, when I was like that, I was like, holy hell.
That's a big deal.
And so we talked about this, and we talked about the thing we talk about here is that you're not going to be able to rebuild the trust overnight, but people right now, there's a unique opportunity because Trump's messing up so bad that you can show them that that's not what you wanted. But Democrats have a hard time with this part the most because we are very smart and very preachy, and we think we know it all because our policy, quote unquote, are right because we went to all this school, or those folks did. Is that as somebody who's made a lot of mistakes and asked for a lot of forgiveness, I have realized how good people can be in forgiving me for things I've messed up on. Well, guess what, Democrats? They'll forgive us for losing our way if we'll admit it. If we'll admit that we went down different rabbit holes and have lost the focus of what our party used to be or what the party was built on, which when I joined it was to be the party of the workers, whether that's the unions or that's the nurses or that's the whatever. Like we were the party of workers. And back then, Republicans was the country club and the rich folks and folks that, and I used to tell people I respected Republicans because they were fighting to protect their money and their wealth because they had worked really hard for that. And I respected that. And we could have that debate on how to distribute wealth, who works for what. Like that's a fundamental of what me and Mike Madrid can actually talk about and argue. But we've gotten so far from that as Democrats, we have to get back to some basic shit and admitting that you have lost your way a little bit and you're going to come back to recenter the party. Here's your values. I got so worked up flying on 4.5 hours out there, Mike. I wrote a New York Times op-ed in the airplane.
Okay.
And just sent it to our mutual friend over there and was like, what do you think about this? Well, I'm meeting with her today at 2:30 and I think they're going to publish it because I was just like, well, first, you know, everybody here knows I sent it to my staff first and said, can you put this in English and in paragraphs? And then they were like, oh, this is pretty good. And it was the thing that says, it's not hard, boys and girls. You admit you're wrong, get everybody back, propose these 3 things to make their lives better, and then start running campaigns a little bit differently than you've always run them, and you can get back to where you are. And we'll see if they'll actually print it. But that's all I got to say about the Milken Institute,
look
Mike.
At you, man. You're speaking at Milken. You're writing for the New York Times. You're international man of travel. Like, look at you. You're
I know
Republican.
about the conclaves because I was
Republican, man.
Don't start that shit. Look, there's a couple other things going on that I want to bring up before we run out of time today, is that lots of folks around the country, Mike, are talking about how, and this is what worries me about the future of the party, is that I believe that the midterm, lots of things can happen in a year and 8 months, whatever it is, but that Democrats are going to have a good year. And Democrats will probably have a good year no matter what happens, if they pass a budget, depending on a war or not. Democrats, listen to me. You're going to have a good year. We're going to have a good year. The question is, are we okay just doing the same shit a little bit different around the edges and just having a quote unquote good year? We win 8 House seats. We take back one of the Senate seats. We win a couple governorships and we're like, oh my God, we figured it all out, boys and girls. It's all over. Well, we could have a gigantic year if we do this right. And I really want y'all to think about this. We're going to have a longer podcast about it. But I was reminded of this week on Tuesday. This is one of the crazy political stuff that I follow, like Mike Madrid follows the damn Catholic Church, is in Tarrant County, Texas, in Fort Worth. There was school board elections on Tuesday. They run nonpartisan races, and there was 11 candidates that were endorsed by the Republican Party and 11 candidates endorsed by the Democratic Party in a place that's 50-50, that Republicans normally win by between 2 and 8 points. And the Republicans just 4 years ago had taken over the entire school board because of lots of money being spent in school board elections that Republicans smartly had been doing at the local level. Well, Mike, on Tuesday night, the Republicans went 0 for 11 because, as you can imagine, and Mike has talked about, overeducated white people are really fucking pissed. They show up in special elections and in primaries in an off year in April, and they just wiped out the whole thing. But that doesn't mean that's the end. It just means that there's energy out there that me and Mike or nobody else is talking about. And I'm really curious, Mike, on your thoughts on that and what we're seeing right now around the country in the polling. His numbers are moving on immigration, and there's something really happening that I think is even more dramatic than the first time Trump was elected.
So look, there's no question there's something on the ground. There's no question that there's an energy. You can see it at Bernie Sanders rallies. You can see it at when AOC shows up. I mean, tens of thousands of people that should not be in most of these districts are driving in, showing up. The energy is there. You're seeing it at town halls. You're seeing it at special elections. A couple of things. The first is you're also seeing this sort of malaise and concern by another wing of the Democratic Party, which is like, what do we do? What do we do? This is what you saw at Milken. Like, how do we get back, right? It's the anger is not enough. And that's good to recognize. While a party is out in the wilderness, as we call it, and both parties have gone through this, and Chuck, I hope they run your New York Times piece because that's exactly it. It's the fundamentals. When things are going really bad, get back down to the brass tacks and get back in line here. But you have to, my concern is the same as yours, probably twofold, or I'll say it differently. The big concern I have about where the country's headed is if the Democrats have a big midterm, and I think they will, but don't learn their lesson of what got them into this spot, they're in bigger trouble because the party will split. And if you look at polling of Democrats right now, it's pretty evenly split between the Bernie AOC wing, who are saying we need to go more and more left, more and more progressive, and the center right, I would say, which is saying more like, let's just fix the broken things that we're doing and start delivering services to people better and start performing better on our promises. And we'll get back to it. But I don't want to move any further left. I don't want to go towards a Green New Deal. I don't want to go towards a single payer health plan. I don't want to pay more in taxes. And that's a divide. That's a legitimate divide within the Democratic Party. Victory has a way of papering over problems in politics. That the Republicans are going to have an even bigger problem when Trump is gone because they don't know what they stand for. At least the Democrats are fighting about it. But if the Democrats can figure it out, if the Democrats can get back to being a working class party, they're going to have not only a bigger midterm, they're going to be well positioned to rebuild the party for the presidential and going forward for at least a generation against the Republicans. If they don't, the exact opposite will be true. You can't be as splintered as you are and win races just because people hate Republicans for the moment, because you get back to this endless cycle. Since 2000, of the 9 elections that we've had, 8 of the last 9 elections have been change elections. Think about that for a second. That is a crazy statistic. And what
with
it
big
means
turnout.
Is people aren't necessarily voting for anybody. They're voting against whoever's in power. They don't care who you are. They don't want you in there. That's what's going on. That's the undeniable fact. And Latinos, more than any other group, as I've been saying this, we have the weakest party anchor. Latino polling has come back towards its historical base. But remember, they're not moving towards the Democrats. They're moving away from the Republicans, the same way they were moving away from the Democrats, not towards the Republicans in the 2024 election cycle. That's what I was saying then. There's no evidence saying Latinos are becoming more Republican. They're becoming more anti-democratic. You know what happens when Donald Trump screws up the economy? They leave him in a hot second because they're not for Trump. They're not for the Republicans. They just don't like the people in power that are screwing things up. And they will move. They will leave in a hot second. And that's what they're doing.
I think you're right. And I think that it brings up a great point as we get to the end of this podcast, that what's been missing a lot out there, as you see Bashir talking about running for president, you see Cory Booker out there on the Senate floor, you see AOC and Bernie, is like the real Latino voice in all of this. I'm happy to report that a voice that's getting out there this weekend and doing something a little special is Ruben Gallego. Ruben Gallego is headed to Pennsylvania to a Republican congressional seat of a guy who could lose, to talk about what Medicare and Medicaid mean to Latinos in that community, and kind of making sure that the Latino voice is not lost in this resistance movement, but in the Ruben Gallego way, which is not the Bernie and AOC way,
Right.
but it's also not the third way. It's in the middle of both of those, which I think is the Latino way,
Agreed.
with a little of both sides, right? And so
I'm so impressed with how he's redefining this new lane. It's not moderate versus progressive. He's literally saying you guys are missing it. It's something totally new and totally different, and he's giving it voice, and it's very impressive to watch. He wrote a great op-ed piece, I think, for the Reading Pennsylvania paper before he shows up there, just appeared a couple days ago. He's running it smart tactically. He's clearly got great staff. They're advancing it by driving the message first. He's going to be saying it again when he's there giving a speech, and then he's going to follow it up, I'm sure, with some press hits. I mean, it's a pro. It's a professional operation, and he uniquely has the message at this moment time in American history, and it's just profoundly fascinating, fulfilling to watch.
And he's working with, when we go up there on Saturday, he's working with the local county Democratic Party. He's working with the state party to build the crowd. He's including people. He's not just running up there and doing something. You know, the big complaint with AOC and Bernie, they'll come into a place and not call the local electeds or the local congressman or other folks. And that's nothing against them. They have their own thing, and that's fine. But Ruben wanted to include as many people as he could and make sure that our voice, I'm not saying Ruben Gallego is going to run for president. I'm not saying anything of the above. Don't put words in my mouth. But he wants to make sure that our voice is heard, which is really, really the important piece of this in this resistance movement. How you resist, how you give truth to power is really, really important. And I think that as you keep in mind, watch your press. There's going to be a great article by Sister Sabrina Rodriguez that's coming out on this as well. He's doing an interview with her today for the rally this weekend. And so there's a lot of things coming up, and there's a lot of things for you to stay tuned in till next week. But as we get ready to end this podcast, I also want to make sure that all of you are liking, sharing. Go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our YouTube. Our YouTube viewership is really growing. So make sure that you're subscribing and sharing with your friends and asking them to subscribe. That's how we continue to keep this ball rolling, along with Spotify, along with Apple Podcast. If you're lucky enough to still have your mom and dad, give them a call this week. And if you have a chance to get out to Reading, Pennsylvania, or get out to Bucks County, come see us, come see Ruben Gallego. Until next week, me and Mike Madrid, we'll see you then.